Hey, this is Pastor Ricky Temple. I'm glad to tell you about a new study we're doing. I love books. I love books, I love books, I love books. And there's a book called Boundaries. And in this book, it talks about boundary conflicts. It talks about family boundaries. It talks about single boundaries. It talks about all kind of great stuff. And it's great. And it's going to be a 3-part series that I'm doing just for you. So if you missed it and you've never read this book, you need to get it. And then you need to follow me along and let me talk about it with you. It's just fun. And it's with a bunch of other people. So it's not just me. We're going to Zoom in, Facebook Lives, all this good stuff. And you can see it. You can get there. And if you weren't there live, you can come in and watch it on demand and be inspired by it. It's all good stuff. So get the book, tune in, follow me along, 3 parts on boundaries. What are boundaries? What are some boundary conflicts? How do you balance all that out? It's good stuff. 3 parts, don't you miss it. Please, please set these new boundary lines and watch it change your life. See you in the study.
The book is called Boundaries, When to Say Yes and How to Say No to Take Control of Your Life. This is the updated version, and it is all about control, because the author assumes that a lot of us live our lives in ways that are out of control, which is very, very true. We tend to not always live in the boundaries we need to. And I've learned that one of the things that's helped me a lot is boundaries, learning how to live within certain limits. I've learned that in order for me to have a happy life, I have to have a life that limits certain things. I cannot be everywhere. I can't do everything. People often say the preacher is always busy, never is off. I think that's crazy living. I think the preacher should be off, you should be off, we should all be off, we should all be able to rest. And so this book kind of helps you establish those boundaries. And many of these things we practice in our family and have for years. And it's helped my marriage, it's helped with my children, it's helped in my personal mental state. I don't feel exhausted. I've been pastoring for 40 years, December 17th, write that down, December 17th, 40 years, and I'm not exhausted, but I am aware of the challenges. And I'm aware that family life, taking care of the laundry, the house, the grass, and all the other stuff, and the business of the church and the business of business can really wear on you. And knowing how to establish boundaries is really important if you want to stay sane. So let me show you where we're going to go. This is an overview. Part 1, what are boundaries? Part 2, boundary conflicts. And then part 3, we'll talk about developing healthy boundaries. In each of these sessions, I will come back and I will allow you to ask me questions. So again, we'll take like a 20-minute run here, then we'll stop. We're going to talk about setting boundaries to improve your life. What does the boundary look like? Boundary problems, how boundaries are developed, 10 laws of boundaries, common boundary myths. That's the first section. Now, one of the things about this book, he likes lists. When I tell you this man has a lot of lists, he's got a lot of lists and stories. And so some of you are going to really get into the stories. I mean, this make you cry. It's, oh my God, I can't believe Sherry went through that. I mean, you finish with it, you're going to be like really, really touched, because it's just got some touching stories. But it's stories that you can put your teeth into. You can say, man, I know somebody like that, or I live that way. And so the first thing I want you to notice is it begins with this exhausting story about a mother named Sherry and her life routines. And the routines are exhausting, impossible to maintain in a healthy way. The 3 initial lessons become real clear in the short time you look at her life. That trying hard isn't working. That's what you learn when you look at Sherry's life. Being nice isn't working. And you learn that taking responsibility for others isn't working. So I want to start with the first one, because this is what the story reveals, and the first major thing he talks about. Trying harder isn't always the answer, he says. Sometimes it just doesn't work. Trying harder, do more, be busy, crank up the engine. Whenever you sit down at the end of the year and you look at your what to do for the next year, the temptation is to say, I got to try hard. I got to do more. And in reality, he says, that's not necessarily true. What you may need is some boundaries. You may be trying to do too much. Trying harder isn't always the next step. Sometimes trying harder is a way to cover your confusion, because the real issue is you're not lazy. Sherry in this story wasn't lazy. Sometimes the problem is you are being too nice. You're doing too much. And here's what he said about that. Being nice out of fear isn't working. You find that out sometimes. Sherry, people-pleasing efforts didn't seem to bring anything to fruition, or didn't bring anything into her life that was helpful. She's an example of a person who was just busy trying to make everybody happy, and it just didn't work. So being nice isn't working. Sometimes you see that. That was the problem in her story. Thirdly, taking responsibility for others isn't working. Sometimes it's not your responsibility. It's not, I mean, to feed you, to house you, to clothe you, to take care of all of your issues. It just isn't your responsibility. Even as a parent, at some point with your adult children, you have to realize what's your job and what's not your job, what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do. And so this is a real introduction into a new way of thinking, which is what you need in order to achieve the kinds of things you want in your life. You have to learn how to think differently. And you just have to say, no, that's not my issue. That's not my problem. I don't need to try harder. I don't need to be nicer. I need to set up a boundary and not take responsibility for others' lives and try to run their life. And so then he goes on, after laying the story out with Sherry and showing the exhaustion of her life, he talks about the potential solutions. So here's what you first need to do. Go back to God's garden plan. That's what he talks about, God's garden plan, the plan God had in the Garden of Eden. Let me read what he said. He'll go back in the Garden of Eden. God told Adam and Eve about ownership. Be fruitful and increase in number. I'm reading from the book now. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature. Your job, Genesis 1:28, was to have independent rulership. That was God's plan. Adam and Eve ran their life. That's what God wanted them to do. That was their responsibility. So the first solution to being burnt out, the first solution to being a person whose life has no boundaries, your life is everywhere, is go back to God's original plan, which includes what he calls the garden plan. You are to take responsibility for for your life. That's what he said. Your job is to be fruitful. Your job is to increase. That's your job. Then he goes on and says this: God's creative responsibility design. God's creative plan was built around responsibility. So that I have a responsibility for me. I really feel this as a pastor. I feel like Overcoming by Faith has a responsibility for itself. I feel that Ricky Temple has a responsibility for himself. I think you have a responsibility for yourself. So what's the solution to the problem of trying to please everybody, working hard, taking responsibility for everybody? I said, no, let's go back to God's original plan. God's plan was for them to be independently in charge of their life. And God's plan was for them to be responsible for their life. That was the design that God put together. Third thing he said was you have to face our distortion of God's responsibility design. The solution to the problem that we're facing, why our lives are without boundaries, why everything is all over the place, like Sherry's life was in the story, is because she has somehow distorted God's definition of responsibility. I see it all the time. You know, there's a tremendous temptation to assume that it is your job. I have a book that I want to point out to you, and I'm going to pull it up real quick here. It's a book that I'm going to share later with parents, and it's on adult children. Oh my goodness, give me a second here, and let me just do myself a favor. This book is so cool. It talks about adult children, and one of the things it says is it's called Doing Life with Your Adult Children. Keep your, I'm not going to read anymore. Doing Life with Your Adult Children is by a guy named Jim Burns, Jim, B-U-R-N-S. And he kind of talks a little bit about this whole idea of responsibility and your responsibility and what you need to do and not do for your grown children. Now, Jim, when I do the book review on him down the road, I'll say some of it I disagree with this a tad. You know, sometimes basically the first chapter says, you know, shut up and be quiet. Sometimes you can't do that. You got to say something. But overall, I like the thesis of the book. He talks about kids that don't launch, kids that won't take responsibility for themselves. So Jim Burns, you might want to get that book. It's be a good read for you. But anyway, back to where we are in our book today on boundaries. So you got to go back to the way God designed things in the Garden of Eden. You got to look at being, God's creative responsibility design, get back to the way he designed it. Adam and Eve were responsible to tend the garden, keep up with it, and then face our distortion of God's responsibility plan, God's responsibility design, and then face our need for, here's the big statement, boundary lines. Boy, now this gets down to the core of the book. The boundary lines. Now, in every life, in every relationship, in everything you do, there needs to be boundary lines. Let me read a line from page 26 in the book. Here's what he said. Any confusion of responsibility and ownership in our lives is a problem of boundaries. Let me read it again. Any confusion, it's on page 26. Any confusion of responsibility and ownership in our lives is a problem of boundaries. Just as homeowners set physical property lines around their land, we need to set mental, physical, I love this, emotional and spiritual boundaries for our lives to help us distinguish what is our responsibility and what it is not, what isn't. Now that, to me, will preach every day. Every day. Every day, people. Just like there are boundary lines around my house, separated by a fence, these boundaries should be separated around you, and you should have boundary lines. So let me ask you a question. Do you have boundary lines? And I want to stop for just a second. I've talked for 15 minutes, and I want to pause here for just a minute. Let's open the floor up a little bit. And I want to just say, because to me, that's the big part of the book right there. That's like major boundary lines. Well, let me read one more before I open it up. Let me read one more. He said, yeah, it's facing our need for boundary lines, and then lastly, facing our struggle with setting boundaries. What do you struggle with? What do you struggle saying no to? What do you struggle telling people no to? I've learned that in order for me to be successful, I have to say no more than I say yes. And I just think it's really important. But a lot of people struggle with this. So maybe I'll go to this next section as well before I open it up. Great questions to ponder at this point. Can I set limits and still be a loving person? What are legitimate boundaries? We'll talk about that down the road here. What if someone is upset or hurt by my boundaries? Sometimes that can't be helped. How do I answer someone who wants my time, love, energy, or money, but you don't really have all that to give them? Why do I feel guilty or afraid when I consider setting boundaries? I know as a pastor, I used to think I have to answer the phone every time somebody calls me. Not anymore. No, I answer. I mean, I'm pretty quick on answering phones and responding, but I've learned that it's okay to say no. I'm off on Mondays with Diane. I'm off. I can't do this. Sometimes, I even today we're riding. I just taking him to lunch. I didn't answer the phone because I'll call him back. I'll call him right back. We're together eating lunch. I'll call him back. She says, you can answer the phone. That's what she told me. You can answer the phone. I said, no, I'm with you, my love, the love of my life. I will not answer the phone. Anyway, there are times when it's okay, but you do feel guilty. You feel like you should. Especially in this age. That's why some of you carry the phone to the bathroom and everywhere you go, because you feel like if you don't answer the phone, something wrong with you. Okay, shower, everywhere, you got the phone with you. You feel guilty about to kill yourself, electrocute yourself, but you can't help yourself. All right, how do I love this now? I see, why do I feel guilty or afraid when I consider setting boundaries? Because you don't realize that boundaries are important. You've not come to that place of growth yet. You have to get there. Because if you don't, I'm telling you, it's not good for you. How do boundaries relate to mutual submission within marriage? That's an interesting question. We'll come to that in our later talk about marriage. And are not boundaries selfish? Aren't they selfish? Isn't it selfish to just put your foot and say, don't cross this line, right? This is the line you don't cross, right? I don't think so. I think it's good. Sherry's problem in the story is, in my opinion, tied to a theology. And some of the scriptures people use hurts us. Let me read a quote here. He said, Sherry's knowledge of the scripture seems to support her lack of boundaries. This book aims to help you see the deeply biblical nature of boundaries as they operate in the character of God. I really believe people believe God wants them tired. they have a doctrine of fatigue and exhaustion. It's like the more fatigued you are, the holier you are. That's why when people describe my life, I always laugh because they always say, we know you're so busy. Why, God, how do you survive? I just laugh. I said, my theology doesn't tell me I can't sleep. So I sleep a lot. I rest, take naps, all kinds of things. Give me an amen, Diane. Am I right about that? Thank you. All right. So chapter 2, what does a boundary look like? And I'm going to pause right there, take a break, because I've learned in life people need to talk to you. So before I talk about what a boundary looks like, let me ask you, are there any questions about what I've said so far? So far, raise your hand. Let's see if we can open the door. I'm gonna stop sharing for just a minute. And then let's see, any questions about anything I've said so far? Because sometimes in these talks, the preacher just keep talking and talking and talking. I got more to say, but before I get to chapter 2, give me a question. Anybody have a question about anything I've said so far? I'll just sit here and go doom, 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 doom. Anybody at all? Question? Raise your hand. You know how to do that? I love this little button.
I see a question.
What you got, Diane? What you got?
Does this make true the old saying, the bigger fences, or maybe just a fence, make a better neighbor? I never heard of that.
I never heard of that either. The bigger
Does
fences.
this make true the old saying, the bigger fences, or maybe just a fence make better neighbors?
I can see some of that. I can. But I'm gonna tell you, I do believe that boundaries do make relationships better at all levels. I think letting people know where things go and don't go, and helping people. I think it's really helpful. I think it's helped our church. I think the boundaries we put around certain things, we start on time. That's a boundary. Everybody knows, we start on time, period. That's it, no questions. And that means we're gonna get out around the same time. People like that kind of, consistency. They don't like to, you ever been in church and they start, you don't know when they're gonna start. You just sitting there, you're waiting. Anybody can get a hand up? Can I get some hands up on that? You don't know when it's gonna start. And you're just sitting there thinking, well, my God, it's been 30 minutes and you start scratching. You don't know what to do because they don't have, and then they don't end. You don't know when it's going to end. So whenever you invite people to church, what's the first thing they ask you? How long will this be? And once they go one time and it's 5 hours, they're not coming back. That's over. It's over. It's like, so I think a boundary is really good. So are there any other questions? If not, okay, let me go back to the next part. Let me show you the next screen again. Let's get back to the next part here. Here we go. Click that button. Okay, now let's talk about what a boundary looks like. This is chapter 2, all right? I love this. Our soul, I love the way he describes this, is a boundary line that we control. I like the fact that he says that inside of me, there is this boundary line. He said, God designed a world, I love this, where, this is on page 30, by the way, in the book. God designed a world where we all live within ourselves. That is, we inhabit our own souls and we're responsible for the things that make up us. Each heart knows its own bitterness, he goes on to say from Proverbs chapter 14, verse 10. In other words, there's a world that Ricky lives in. And sometimes I'm really excited about that because nobody can hear me thinking, right? And so there's a boundary line that God established so that I could have my own private little world. Now, and I need to be clear that that boundary draws lines of responsibility. I'm not responsible for everything. Now, this is so important to get. I am not responsible for everything. And I just love the way he explains it, because he does some good Greek work, some good Bible work here. Page 31-ish, thereabout, you'll see between 31 and 32. He talks about something that I just love. Now, here's what it's in Galatians chapter 6, verse 2 through 5, where it talks about bearing your own burdens and bearing one another's burdens. I love it. And here's what he says, basically, is how it works. Because you've heard the verse, right? Bear you one of those burdens and so on. And then the way he makes this so plain, Galatians 6:2-5, he says, we're only asked to carry the burdens that are too heavy for others. In verse 2, the Greek word for burden is used, barai, means load, something you can carry. Okay, you got that? Burden, it means something you can carry. Verse 5, where it says, let a man bear his own burdens, is a different word, fortion, which means this. It means cargo. There's something too heavy to carry. So think of the first word in verse 2, as like a knapsack, something you can put on your back. That burden you should carry. Nobody should carry it for you. There's some responsibilities that are yours. You shouldn't give it to anybody else. You shouldn't expect anybody else to do that. And, you have to be careful that you don't get a manipulative spirit and you're trying to get everybody to, be responsible for your life, especially if it's your life. There are times when a cargo, a load will come, like you said in verse 5, and you need somebody to bear it for you. That's different. I even like the verse in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 10. I kind of dropped this in for you. In that verse, he talks about if a person doesn't work, don't let them eat. The responsibility that they have to feed themselves is really important. Sometimes, Diane, I'll see somebody, outside is homeless, and let me see. I'm gonna come out. I'm gonna come out because I'm gonna see your face when I tell you this, because this is important. This is when I see a homeless person sitting, on the side of the road and them signs. And now if I see you one time, but if I see you out there at 9 o'clock every day, 9 to 5, I got a problem with that. That's just me. I think you can go to work. If you can sit out there in the hot sun, as a woman, she was out there in the hot sun. It was 90 degrees. And she's out there with that sign. I said, listen, you're going to faint. You need some water or something. And then I look, and I can't. I give. I mean, I'm a generous person. I remember one time, I'll tell you a story real quick. One time I went to a place to eat in town. This is before the pandemic. That was about 2019. And this guy, he saw me and he said, he came up to, he was going to different cars asking for money. And then when he saw me, he said, oh, Lord, whoa, I know I'm going to get some money now. He said, one of Savannah's finest preachers. I know I'm going to get some money now. And yes, he did. I said, you know what? You know what Diane did? Diane said, listen, that was so good, Ricky, give him some money. Just give him some money on that one. That was too good. And we did. We gave him some money. But that's not my responsibility. And I'm telling you, it's hard for you. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Is it hard to say no sometimes? Raise your hand if it's hard for you. Let me look around. Let me see who. I see you, Latoya. I see your hand. Why it's hard for you? You can't say no. You been giving away all your money, huh? I want to know. Confess it. Talk to me. You're giving away all your money.
I do, but I have the hardest time telling no to family members. That's
really. You do.
It's very
They be hitting you up too, don't they, girl? They be hitting you up. Let's see. Sherry, can you say no? Or you just what? You cold? Can you talk to me? Can you say no?
You talking to me?
Yes. Can you say no?
Absolutely, I can say no.
I figured that the way you look like, I can tell you no.
Well, so it's like this though. I had to learn years ago because, for a lot of reasons, I had to learn years ago that, and I would tell my kids this, that I worked hard to pay my bills, and then what was left over was for my social life. If I gave money away, I'm giving away my social money that other people spent their bill money, and that's not fair.
Okay, that's what we're saying. All right, she got it figured out now. I'm telling you. Do we have questions up? I see Yolanda, you just saying amen, or you got your hand up. She had a question. I don't know if that's a question.
No, I was just raising my hand to being one of those individuals that had a hard time saying no. I've had to learn as well. When I used to become resentful after giving, that I knew it was time to make some changes.
Okay. Brother Singleton, is it hard for you to give up the money and to give up stuff?
When it comes to my children, no. I think I feel pretty comfortable outside of my children. I guess that's the same as, no, it's limited to children. So my children, I find it kind of difficult because I think that parent want to step in and give a hand. And we have the kind of children that don't always ask. So I think, in fact, they are reluctant to ask. And so when there's a need, I feel that it's a necessity.
Okay.
Other than that, I don't have a problem saying no.
Zaina. Yeah, I see you, girl. I want to know, can you say no? Latoya says she have a hard time. Can you say no?
It depends whether it includes the grandchildren or not.
Ooh, Lord, Diane, you know you're done, girl. You know you done, right? You like Diane. Now, Lorenza, I see you on here, man. Can you say no? Are you a no person? Ever? Come on, man. Are you?
It's hard for me to say no, to be honest. It's hard. Yeah.
You see this picture he's got on here? Look at Lorenzo's picture. That's your daughter. Who's that on your head like that? That's your daughter?
Yes,
look at you. Look, yeah, we know you can't. All right. Well, listen, let me say this. The book is amazing. I got to get back. I got to finish. So, if I don't get careful, I got to get done here. Okay, let's move on. All right. So we all can relate to that, right? But there are some things that people have to learn to carry, and we don't want to be the ones who wreck them. But there are benefits, though, if you establish boundaries. And I love this part, too. The benefits of establishing boundaries. Here we go. They help us to guard our hearts with all diligence. It does something good for your heart. Proverbs 4:23. And you got to make sure you don't see boundaries. They're not as walls that deny entrance. They're not. Boundaries should not keep bad in and good out. So we're not saying boundaries are bad, but boundaries can be helpful. They guard our treasures. They keep the pearls inside and the pigs outside. That verse in Matthew 7:6 where it says, don't cast your pearls to swine. There are times when God doesn't want you to give to people that are going to waste it and squander it. So there's an important balance. Now let's jump to chapter 3 and talk about the boundary problem. Now in this section, I found it really emotional because it talks about people that you have to set boundaries for. If you notice in the illustration, you've got this guy who's he's a puppeteer and he's puppeting these two people. And I thought this was a fascinating section because in chapter 3, he starts talking about how people manipulate you. He calls them controllers, and they don't respect your boundaries. And then he divides them into two categories: aggressive controllers, manipulative controllers, and he talks about what they look like. Let me describe the aggressive controller for you. And this is on page 56 in the book, okay, page 56. These people clearly don't listen to others' boundaries. Listen to that now. They don't listen to others' boundaries. They run over other people's fences like a tank. They are sometimes verbally abusive, sometimes physically abusive. That's an aggressive controller, a person who respects no one's boundaries. Then he talks about manipulative controllers. They're less honest than the aggressive controllers. Manipulators try to persuade people out of their boundary. Hey, come on, let me move your boundary line for me. They talk others into yes. If you've got somebody that does that, you got to be careful. You're not dealing with a manipulative controller. They indirectly manipulate circumstances to get their way. They seduce others into carrying their burdens. They use guilt messages all the time. Boy, I'm telling you, when I read that, I had to pause. I thought about Jacob and Esau in the Bible in Genesis 25. You might want to read that story on your own. Genesis 25, verse 29 through verse 34 is an example of it. But you see this incredible example of two people, two brothers, Jacob and Esau, and how Jacob was just a manipulator. And that manipulation ended up backfiring on him in his life with his son Joseph. Remember, his sons lied to him about Joseph being eaten by some animal, and really he was sold into slavery. So you see the manipulation, you see this aggressive nature that Jacob had roll through his family for a long time. And it injures people. He talks about the injuries controllers set in motion. They set a domino effect in motion that's just really powerful. He said, boundary injuries, this is on page 58. He said, boundary injuries at this point, you might be saying to yourself, wait a minute, how can a controller be called injured? They're the injurers, not the injured. Now follow this. Controllers do lots of damage to others, but they also have boundary problems. Let's see what goes on underneath. Controllers are undisciplined people. They have little ability to curb their impulses or desires. So in other words, people that are doing you like this are probably injured themselves, and they're not disciplined. They're people who can't control themselves, and they invade your life and damage you the way they're damaged. It's really a powerful thing on them. That whole exchange on page 58 was really interesting to me, because he says controllers are undisciplined people. They have little ability to curb their impulses or desires. While it appears that they get what they want in life, they are still slaves to their appetites. This guy looks all dressed up, got his red bow tie on in this, but he is not under control. And then he goes on to talk about the limits controllers face. Controllers are also limited in their ability to take responsibility for owning their lives. Having relied on bullying or indirectness, they can function on their own in the world. They're really not very balanced. They have a lot of limits. They'll never advance much. They also become, he says, isolated. They don't have many friends. And they're just non-responsive. You can talk to them. You can try to, help them. They don't have many people that they can run to when they have needs. Everything in their life is about manipulating and dominating. And then on page 60, he talks about controllers and non-responsive people. He says this: controlling non-responsive people have a hard time, controlling non-responsive people have a hard time looking past themselves. I thought that was interesting. People like this they're non-responsive. They have a hard time seeing beyond themselves. They live in this blurry, no boundaries, say anything, do anything world, and they just damage people. They're just wrecking balls through life. Now, I want to tell you, some of us can look at our lives and say, boy, I was like that at some seasons. I was a controller, a manipulator, and you see where it's limited your life, your love life, trust on jobs, and people pull away from you. You're not able to connect. I thought this book made me think, man, I said, wow, let me look at my life to make sure I'm not doing this. Churches do this. Pastors do it sometimes. That's the only way they can lead, through manipulation, and it's just so amazing. I remember, and if I can stop sharing for a minute, I remember when I first started pastoring, I felt the pressure, especially during the offering time, to come up with some way to get y'all to give. Had to have a special little word. Got to say something. I just start off like this. Well, I was praying and the Lord kind of spoke to me. I saw some angels flying, make up something. If you're not careful, you be lying. You need me to say, you be lying. You just need to tell them, we need you folks to give because we don't have enough money to pay the bills. That's the truth. But you don't want to say that because that sounds awful. So you just lie. You just manipulate, and it becomes a culture. And I just thank God for our church. Let me just say, you folks are wonderful. I've told you, I'm not doing any of that. You've been faithful in your giving. God bless you. Please continue. But it is, when you're trying to make everything work and you got hundreds and hundreds of people, you fall into traps. Now, in this story, though, he's saying, no, they didn't fall into a trap. This is the cultural habit. And that's why you have to look at yourself and say, am I looking for a man to take care of me, or am I really looking for a husband that I want to love and care for? Am I looking for a wife that I want to love and care for? Am I looking for somebody to help pay my bills? You have to check your heart and make sure that you're being honest, because this whole example here that he talks about, controllers, then I got stuck here for a minute. I'll tell you, it touched me because I deal with people and I fight this. I make sure that when I do things, I'm trying to do it for the right reasons. Try not to be manipulative. I'm not going to lie to you folks and tell you one thing and do something else. I want to tell you the truth. And I just believe that God blesses that. Any questions about that part of it before I go a little further? Any questions? Great thoughts. Was that a good word? Did you like that? The controller part, you know anybody like that? Some of us have been controllers, right? Manipulative. We don't have to say anything now, but we've all traveled down that road. You know, you see somebody got something, you think you're supposed to have it because they have it. No, that's not yours. That's called covetousness. And you want to make sure you don't fall into that. Where that means you want something somebody else has so bad, you'll take it. And you got to be careful. If you're the other woman, you got to be careful. You're not being covetous, trying to take that woman's man. That's not your man. That's her man. That's his wife. And you have to tell yourself the truth. But if you're not careful, you'll lie to yourself. All right.
Pastor, there's one question.
What's the question?
It says, how do you navigate in a marriage when one person is a no person and the other is a yes person?
Just say what your responsibilities is for your part. You know, I mean, if I'm asking them and they say no, they don't want to buy a car, save up enough money to buy your own car. I mean, I just don't think that you can control their yeses and nos. I don't control their yeses and nos. I control mine. I know that in a marriage that can be very complicated, but there's some things you just can't control. I love the fact that the boundary book says, set your own boundary lines. Know what you control and what you don't control. The main thing is you don't allow someone to manipulate you and control you. That's the main thing. All right, let's see if we can get back to where we were and get this done today. All right, so in the next section here, it's chapter 4, how boundaries are developed. Boundaries start at home. They start in families. It's in the house, people. It's the children. Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way that he should go. Now, what that does not mean is you train up a child in the way that you think they ought to go and they're going to always go. So some people think that means raise them in church and they'll always go to church. No, that verse has nothing to do with that. That verse is saying your job as a parent is to train up a child in the way that he would naturally go. Find his natural gifts, skills, bents, and help him get there. Ricky was a musician, so I had to put up with the beating on the table. Ooh, that boy should get on my nerve with that. He used to beat on the table. You're trying to eat, Ricky, stop beating on the table. Daddy, it's a beat in my head. Well, I'm gonna beat you in your head if you don't stop hitting on this table. He was always playing music loud. He was always, that's in him. You know, Christina is different. Christina is philosophical. Christina is a whole different kind of animal. She's a whole different person. You know, she's singing. She used to sing all the time. Used to run Ricky crazy. And she'd be singing and be trying to tell me, boy, I can't worship God. I'm worshiping the Lord. And so she would just tell him, Daddy, this is her favorite line. He's not my daddy, right, Daddy? Tell him that. He's not my daddy. That was her favorite line. They didn't fuss much, but when they did, it was around those issues, her volume and his beating on things. And anyway, but the issue was for me as a parent to find out where their strength was and to train them up in that way, to help them get to where they're called to be. Really, it's more about a verse about purpose. Parents' job is to help the child get to their purpose. It's not about you making sure they always stay on 3rd Street. Your job is to find out what street he's supposed to be on. You may have a child that's supposed to be on 10th Street. Your job is to help him get there. And so this whole section in the book talks about parents and how they are the one who set the boundaries. Then he talks about boundary problems, and those problems start early in life. You can tell something's wrong early. And he says something interesting, and this is on page 75 in the book. Boundary problems are rooted in thousands of encounters with others, as well as in our own nature and personality, which is important because he'll talk more about this later on, about how your personality contributes to this. But there's something about understanding that a person has several different encounters, and those encounters shape the boundaries, shape the lines in their life. That's why certain negative exposures can have a real negative impact on kids. And you got to be careful about the boundaries you establish and the atmosphere you establish. It's a tremendous section. Then he talks about character traits, which I love, that contributes to how we approach boundaries. Each person is different. And, you know, you have 2 kids, 3 kids, you can tell. Each one of them has a different personality, and that affects them. And then sin folk, I love that, contribution contributes to our approach as well. Sin is plain old sin. Sometimes it's just sin, and I can say that and you got it. Chapter 5, the 10 laws of boundaries. The law of sowing and reaping, which you know a lot about, the law of responsibility, the law of power, and this has to do with control, the law of respect, the law of motivation, the law of evaluation, the law of activity, being proactive in your life, the law of envy, the law of activity, the law of exposure. All of those laws, I could spend a lot of time on each one, but that would not be good, because that would take a long time. He likes lists, and I think those things are wonderful. The bottom line is that those things are important. And so we need to understand the problem of boundaries and how these laws impact the boundaries in your life. Now, I want to take a moment here, and I think I'm running out of time. I got 15 more minutes. And so let me get down to, if I can, some more question time for you. So I'm going to let you read that. That's on page 87 there, and you start plowing all the way through. You get down to page 93, and then we get to the next section, which I want you to see. This is called common myths, boundary myths. Common boundary myths. And there's some moral laws. He's got so many, I'm telling you, this guy's got so many lists in this book. Laws. I can spend a lot of time on all these laws, the law of motivation, the law of this, the law of that, but read it, enjoy it. It's good stuff. Stuff you kind of should know already if you've been in church for a while, but if not, you'll enjoy it. I'm going to get down to this last section, common boundary myths. Now, this is good. A myth, he says, is a fiction that looks like a truth. Sometimes it sounds so true that Christians will believe it automatically, but it's not true. You see a lot of that in this day and age. We talk about this vaccine, this and all this stuff, and this whole, you know, I've just been so amazed. I've seen so much death, so much loss because people are believing myths, and it's just tragic. But let me get on to what the book says, not my little commentary. Common boundary myths. Number 1, if I set boundaries, I'm being selfish. That's the first myth. No, you're saving your life. I call it being self-concerned, because if you don't set boundaries, you're going to be in trouble. This starts on page 106, by the way. Secondly, boundaries are a sign of disobedience. No, they're not. It's a sign of drawing a line. Number 3, if I begin setting boundaries, I will be hurt by others. Well, maybe not, but you can't let that control you. Number 4, if I set boundaries, I will hurt others. Sometimes it hurts people's feelings. You can't talk now, can't give them the money, can't what I mean, but you have to set boundaries. If you don't, you will hurt your marriage, hurt your life, hurt yourself, hurt your health. Boundaries number 5 mean that I am angry. No, it means you're clear sometimes. Now, sometimes it could be true. I've set boundaries because I was angry. I was tired of being tired. I was tired of being broke. I was tired of being whatever. So it did affect me. And sometimes that's a good thing. Number 6, my myth, when others set boundaries, it injures me. Not true all the time. No, I think it helps you. Number 7, boundaries cause feelings of guilt. Yeah, it does for a season, but that's not a permanent situation. And number 8, boundaries are permanent, and I'm afraid of burning bridges. That can be a real temptation because you don't want anybody to leave you. And so you're afraid to draw a boundary. But I'm telling you, if you want to save your life, you have to do that. Part 2, we'll talk about in a minute, but let me stop here and let me just stop right there and say we have 12 minutes of questions, but that's the first 100 pages of the book. I got you through it. I did. Zip. I love reading. It's such a cool thing, especially if you know how to break it down into pieces. So success comes in pieces. So here's the deal. I want you to talk to me, ask me any question about the book. I'm not going to ask you anything about Revelations or Daniel, none of that tonight. It's all about the book. So if you got a question about boundaries, about what I said today, you want more clarification about something, please feel free to raise your hand, put it in the chat. and I'll be glad to respond to it. But this is our talk time, 12 minutes. Give me a thought. Pastor Rick, I want to know about this. Miss Diane, you've heard me for now a long time. Do you have a boundary question that you'd like to start us off with? What do you think about our talk so far? What'd you think, lady?
Yeah, I'm in session, but I'm also juggling your famous grandbaby. And I can't say no to my grandbaby. That's a
You need a
boundary
boundary
line.
right now. This is a living example right now in front of you.
No,
See?
in the grandma manual, page 7, second paragraph, it says,
sad.
thou shalt always answer the phone when your grandbaby calls.
Bad, Sherry Butler.
So that is the boundary.
Sad.
That's the
Marina,
line.
oh, Brenda, Marina, I hope you're watching. This is sad. I'm telling you. Let me tell you something, people. That's true. When she wasn't calling her, she'd be bugging me, calling me, not bugging me. I mean, calling.
I already told her you can't call Pop Pops because Pop
That's
Pops
right.
is teaching Bible study.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
So-
And so she wanted to stay on here. She said, just put me on mute, Grandmama. So
Okay.
she's supposed to be on mute.
Okay. Well, that's
Yep.
an example of no boundaries. I want you to
Of a
see.
good boundary.
Okay.
Don't
all right.
let other people other than your grandbaby interrupt you. That's
All
the
right.
boundary.
Well, the Haynes heard you. So, all right. So we're gonna let that be. Mr. Haynes, I know you heard that. All right. So anybody else have a question for me? A question, a thought, an idea, something that's come to your mind while I was talking. Just something brief so I can respond to it. Any questions at all? Anybody? What do you think about what we talked about? Give me some of that. Give me some feedback. What do you think about it?
So, Pastor,
Yes.
the boundaries about the aggressiveness, and the second one. Actually, I have a reaction of agitation with, and it causes me to create the fence around them.
Okay. Yeah. But I like the fact that in pointing it out in the book, because I know people like that. And when I read it, I thought about them and I said, okay, that's interesting. But I also think it's, once you understand where a person is, it helps you love them. And so I love that part of the book. I thought it was that really spoke to me. Because some people really have a hard time with, not being manipulative and all that stuff. So I like that part. Anybody else have a thought?
Hey, Pastor Rick, this is Eugene.
Hey, Eugene, what's up?
I got a question. I'm the only child, and how do you have healthy boundaries with your mother and your parents when they're older and they're single and they like pull a lot of you? So you're trying to have healthy boundaries with being there for your mother and then also being there for your wife and juggling work and everything else. It's quite difficult.
It is, but you just have to draw the boundaries and let them catch up. I'm just really big on, I'm off, like, for example, certain days I'm off. I'm really off for real. There's certain, I love people. So that's my weakness. I like people. So I always want to be available and talk and laugh and come to your house, take my shoes off. I like that kind of stuff. But I think you help, I use the term carefully. You train people how to treat you, Dr. Phil said. You train them, and you somehow in your relationship with your mom and them, you have to kind of renegotiate the contract and say, hey, I'm going to be unavailable for the next 5 hours, so I'm not going to answer the phone. Or you have to just help them along. And sometimes you have to say, I can only do that on Mondays, not on Thursdays. And people adjust if you are consistent, because if something happened to you, they'd adjust. So that's what I would say. I know it's tough sometimes, Eugene, because you care, but don't be nervous because it's a little awkward. But that's part of setting boundaries. It is. So that's what I would say. Somebody else have a thought or a question?
There's a question online. How do you handle situations when failure to set boundaries with family members has affected your marriage?
When you say it one more time.
How do you handle situations when failure to set boundaries with family members has affected your marriage?
Repent and set the boundaries. It's hey, I should have done this. For whatever reason, I didn't, but I get it now, and I'll set new boundaries. And I think it really helps. We've done that. Dan and I have always tried to do that, and it really helps. You know, these are things she deals with, things I deal with. And I think it makes a difference when you set boundaries like that. So this day, I'm sorry, I messed up. I apologize. I wasn't mature enough to see it, but I see it now. And, you know, so start today, new boundaries, and talk it over with the family. Go ahead.
Yeah, another safe thing to do too is you set boundaries for your family, and he sets boundaries for his family, because you know how that is. If your spouse sets boundaries for your family, you might get mad and have attitude and be mad with him for setting boundaries that you want him to set. You know, so it can, and you actually have more knowledge and of your family, how to handle them, what works and what does not work. So our rule when we got married was, okay, I will handle my family. You let me know if something is uncomfortable or there's a boundary that you need. Most of the time I knew the boundary he needed, but because you know your family, but it's like, I will, you know, you let me know what's uncomfortable. I will set the boundary for my family. I will let you know what's uncomfortable for me. You set the boundary for your family. It's just like, I can call my brother big head, but if you call my brother big head, I'm going to have attitude, you know, that kind of thing. And it can cause a lot of unnecessary drama. So if you just make a decision that if your spouse is struggling with something, you can't just say, honey, you need to just get over it. You need to set the boundaries. You be that spokesperson, you know, where you handle your family, they handle their family.
And I think it helps when you're bold enough and mature enough and fair enough to do that, because there are times when if your brother comes over, takes your shoes off, his feet smell, you know, now dude, get used to, come here. You can't come over here and take them shoes off. Now, you know, you're going to have the whole room lit up. So you need to keep your shoes on. Then he'll wash his feet. Maybe he'll come by and say, okay, I'm gonna wash my feet. I mean, he shouldn't have to say that. And what Diane would do is she would even say to me, I know you want to do this, but I think we need a boundary here, because you want to let them, like, for example, let them all come. No. I know them. They can't all come. She would draw a line. So she would help me and I would help her. Somebody else have a question?
There's another question on that says, how do you have boundaries when you're raised as only child and your spouse was raised with several siblings and think they're all entitled to my stuff?
Yeah, you talk about that, and then the spouses have to agree, okay, we're not going to do that. And you know, you have to help your spouse. Diane would help me and I would help her. And she wouldn't let people cross lines that I was uncomfortable with. She wouldn't. She let me have my space. And so, you know, there are times they want to get together and talk around the television. I don't want to do that. So they don't bother me. They get around TV and just talk loud, and I go to my space and I'm happy. So, and we're exactly that. I was the only child. She had siblings, and she would tease me about that. You was by yourself. I said, yes. And I had peace of mind. So, you know, so, you know, we had to work that out. Is that another question we got?
How do you prevent burnout from having to set boundaries continually at work?
That's just part of work. That's why you get paid. It's going to always be that way. You know, pray you make big bucks and you live past it. You know, I have to set boundaries all the time. It's part of my job, you know, and you help people. I like people, you know, fall in love with the people, give them a chance. And, you know, it's just part of work. We can't get rid of that. Sorry. It's people, a job, part of life. Somebody else.
Elaborate on when a boundary is viewed as being too self-centered.
If it's only benefiting you and it hurts everybody else around you, then it's a wrong boundary. You don't want to set boundaries that hurt people. That's one of the things he talked about. You want boundaries that are fair. You don't want to have boundaries. I'm not talking. You know, that's not fair. You know, you live here. We need to talk. You know, be reasonable. Are you going to be loud and cussing out people? You know, don't do that. There are things that you can set in motion that are painful. You can put up some tall walls around your life that make it difficult to love you. Don't be that way. All right, is that it?
Unless there's someone who wants to unmute and ask a question.
Yes, I have a question. When you mentioned in the book how boundaries, sometimes in the book, the author had mentioned that how we can have guilt. And I know I was in counseling session when I went to counseling. And that was one of the things that I worked on was, you know, setting boundaries and telling people no, because I couldn't tell people no. And I was stressed out and overwhelmed. And so now, I mean, how do you move past the guilt? You know, now I say it now. I try to take the guilt head off because she told me, she said, take the guilt head, take it off. You don't belong to you. But how do you, I still feel guilty, even after saying, even though, and I really carefully think about what I'm saying, why I said no, or why I put those boundaries in place. But I always feel guilty, like, oh, I guess I could have done, I could have did this, but I know I should have said no.
Yeah.
So do you ever move past the guilt?
Let me say this to you. Here's what helped me get past the guilt. The truth. I'm not going to keep lying to you and say that's okay, because it's not okay. I'm lying to you. There are things that I don't want people to say to me. You know, there are things that I'll give a person a chance once or twice maybe, but there are things I say because I don't want to feel bad when I see you. So no, I'm not going to, you can't keep borrowing my money because I want you to pay me back. Let's be clear. You tell me on the 10th, I want to see it on the 10th before lunchtime. So just tell me you want me to give it to you. I know myself. So there are things I tell people, I set boundaries in place to keep our love strong. You're lying to them if you allow them to cross lines and you're sitting there being offended. Somebody came to my house one time and they started walking around giving themselves a private tour, and I stopped them and said, excuse me, back up the train. Where you going? This is not a museum. Thou shalt not walk around on thine own. I mean, it was like, no, I don't know where you got that from. So yeah, and it's hard to say those things sometimes, but he needed to hear that. You know, he said, I want to see it. I said, you can see it from here, but we're not giving tours. I mean, that's hard, but helpful, because you don't need to let people, especially if it's your kids, they grow up doing stuff and end up getting hurt or end up, losing a job. I think I help you when I speak to you, especially if I do it in love. And I don't feel guilty. I stop feeling guilty. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. It's awkward. So don't get confused with feeling awkward because that's because you spoke the truth. There's an awkward feeling that comes with that. And you can call it guilt, but it's just being mature. No, you can't do that. Sorry. Smile at them. That'll help a little bit.
I have a question on
Good.
Facebook
Thank
Live.
you, my friend. Thank you. Okay. Now we're at 8 o'clock. I'm going to sum it up.
But there is one more question on one from Facebook Live.
Okay, let's do it. This last question.
If you are a person who is taken advantage of and family is not used to you not being available or not having money, how do you respond to them when they go on the attack and say you're selfish and you only care about yourself when you try to set a boundary?
You saw what I just did? Crickets. Look at my face. Really? You believe that for real? That's not true. The truth is that's not true. I mean, it's not true. You're being self-concerned. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not being selfish. Selfish is thinking that I'm responsible for your life. No, I'm not. I am not responsible for you. I can help you. I can be generous, but for you to make me responsible for your life is selfish. And so what you do is sometimes you just get crickets. You say, well, okay, that's how you see it. I don't see it that way. And if a person is not mature enough to have a conversation, I don't have a conversation. Well, I can't talk to you about that because you think you're supposed to move in here and stay until you get ready to leave. I don't think so. This ain't your house. You can't do that. No, I can't give you money like that. This is not the Bank of America. Even Bank of America wants to give you, got to fill out a loan application. And then they look at your FICO score. You ain't paid me back for the last $50 I gave you, or the last $200 I gave you, or the last $1,000 I gave you. At what point? Here's something I say. Diane, finish the sentence for me. I have never made friends with
money.
Thank you. I've only made enemies because when I stop giving them money, they don't like me. They think I work for them. I do not work for you. I'm not on your payroll. I say that in love. That's a boundary. I'm drawing a line saying no. People who train you to think that way have made you immature. That's an immature statement. And I say that in love to the people on Facebook Live. Thank you for watching, because that's just, they need to grow up. And so Paul said, if they don't work, I read it's in the book, right? Second Thessalonians said, don't work, don't eat, don't eat, don't eat. It's on the slide. I had it somewhere. Anyway, you got the point. You know me, I'm timely, people. It's 8:03. I'm over. I hope you had a good time. You come back next week. We got more to talk about. Hold on. Let me show you where we're going next week. We got stuff to talk about next week. And I'm going to show you where we're going. We are going here. Part 2, conflicts. See, you got to come back next week because we want to talk about families, friends, spouses, children, work, the digital age. That thing got y'all so bound. Some of you so bound you got to check your Facebook every few seconds. Boundaries in yourself and boundaries in God. Man, this is going to be good stuff. You don't want to miss it. We got stuff to talk about. Hope you had a good time. I had a good time. Now I close with this. I always give you my email because everybody has it, right? Email me at pastor@overcomingbyfaith.org. Is that right? Yeah, pastor@overcomingbyfaith.org. Email me a question if I didn't get a chance to answer tonight. But our time is up. We got to go. And thank you for coming. You came out in strong strength. I like that. A bunch of y'all came out today. Yay. That's what I'm talking about. Tell a friend next time. Don't come by yourself. Bring somebody with you.
Boundaries. I'm telling you, this study is one that can really lift your life. Imagine being able to put those lines around your life and saying, I'm clear about what a boundary is. For some of you, this is a new moment. You now know I have the right to draw a line around my life. Man, it's just right. Now, I want to pray for you. And I want you to just take this moment, breathe it in. Let's pray. Father, let them be open to boundaries. Let it be a transforming moment for them. May they never be the same. May they embrace this moment, embrace this definition of what a boundary is, and may they say, this is my new choice. This is my new decision for my future. In your name we pray, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. Wow, what a great thing. I'll see you next time. We got more to talk about boundary conflicts, more things to help you understand how to deal with boundaries, but all that comes up next time. So see you next time. God bless. And remember, come on, live in the boundary. It's okay.